So arguably, we have 3 successive administrations right now pursuing the same policy, which is get us out of the Middle East.
And it clearly doesn't work. I mean, there's a lesson here.
What do
no
you
matter
mean?
how much you try to disentangle yourself from the Middle East is going to come and, I don't know what the right term is, stab you in the back or be like a major problem for you.
So the problem for the Biden administration right now is that they're full-throated and I would say ill-conceived idea to scream from the rooftops that they are committed to a human rights first
They're not,
approach
though.
to the world.
Oh, to the world, I guess, yeah, but not to the Middle East.
That has taken a beating, and so the Middle East has done that to them. That was their mistake to declare that.
Well, but
and because their real policy is to disentangle from the Middle East. So in the sense that like it's a rhetorical aspiration that they screwed up at making, and now the Middle East has gotten its revenge or something like that. But I still think their policy is one to not care about Israel Palestine.
So
because they want out. Right?
Okay, but is that wise to want out of a region that is actually of strategic importance to the U.S. and always reasserts itself in our imagination, no matter how much we try to separate ourselves from it?
Make the strategic case for me. And I mean...
That the Middle East matters?
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those things that keeps popping up.
If the Middle East doesn't matter, then does anything really matter? I guess China, then you would just be left with maybe China. That's it.
Yeah,
otherwise,
arguably.
you can make an argument that literally nothing is of existential importance. Maybe climate change, I'm not particularly persuaded about that, as we talked about in a previous episode. But I guess it's existential ultimately. But then again, everything is death. Well, whatever.
No, look. There's a changing energy picture that, in fact, does degrade the strategic importance of the Middle East.
I've never been persuaded that oil is the fundamental reason that the Middle East matters. I mean, yes, imports from Saudi Arabia have pretty much dropped down to zero. I don't think that changes the fundamental question here.
No, I mean, it's not that it matters directly to the United States. I mean, I think the more supple argument for that is that we haven't decarbonized so much, and even though the U.S. is now a swing producer due to fracking and the rest of this, and can mitigate disruptions in the Middle East, there's a broader strategic interest in maintaining order within the Middle East because the global economy still relies on oil to an extremely large amount. So, in fact, having some level of order there matters.
That's not the main argument, though.
But what's the main argument for the Middle East mattering apart from the lives of Middle Eastern people?
That what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East, and it never has. Like, this is the thing. Like, how much do we have to be reminded of this basic fact? Obama thought that the Middle East didn't matter, and I have actually made the argument in a piece. I didn't extend it because it's sort of like a somewhat speculative argument. I don't think that Trump would have been elected president if it wasn't for Obama's non-intervention in Syria.
Well, I didn't read that piece. Where was that?
Because Obama's failure to intervene and take the Syrian civil war seriously led to one of the worst refugee crises in modern history, which led to the refugee spillover that actually changed the very makeup of Europe. So let's just, assuming we have an interest in Europe's future, which I think many Americans would say is actually one of our strategic interests, to care about the future of our closest allies in Europe, I do think it's worth wondering and considering how much Europe was affected in any number of ways. The rise of right-wing populism, the looking inward, the crumbling of European unity or coordination on any number of issues because of what the Syrian civil war and its spillover effects did to the European project. That's number one. But when we look at Trump, one of Trump's major campaign issues had to do with the threat of terrorism coming from the Middle East, and that was intimately intertwined with the Syrian civil war. It wasn't even intimately intertwined with the Syrian civil war. It was literally part of the Syrian civil war. the rise of ISIS, the Muslim ban. Let's not forget that was one of his signature issues. We forget about it now because it's like no one cares about terrorism all that much in the U.S. now. It is worth remembering at that particular moment in 2016, that was in the top 2 or 3 issues for our country, and certainly for Donald Trump, because ISIS was in the headlines on a regular basis. And we were worried about the spillover effects with lone wolves. That was really a big part of the national discourse. And Trump specifically drew on those fears to make his case that we had to shut down the borders. Even when it came down to our southern border, he would talk about how terrorists might infiltrate from our southern border. So it's just that probably wouldn't have been expected in 2012 or 2008. But the fact that terrorism has been a major issue for the U.S. for, 16 or 17 of the last 20 years since 9/11. So anyway, the bigger point here is that in a way that Obama wouldn't have expected, Trump was able to weaponize this issue, and he was able to gain more support through his ability to employ the language of fear, specifically about the Syrian civil war and its spillover effects, i.e. the rise of ISIS and terrorism.
I mean, the reason I'm conflicted on this is because, when you invoke the European project, it's one of the healthiest things that could have happened to the European project is that the comeuppance that the kind of sunny optimism of liberal, order took from the Middle East blowing up in its face. So I have very mixed feelings about that. Like
Wait, you think the comeuppance was ultimately
healthy because it's a nonsense world that those people were living in before all of that happened. So in that sense, where the threat of terror attacks is much, has proven to be much more real is Europe, and that's a serious problem for them. And it's not something to wish on them. But overall, I don't I don't follow you full on that line of argument.
Do we have an interest in minimizing the prospects of terrorist activity in European allied countries?
I think the Europeans need to wake up and start dealing with the world around them, and they're doing that now, and they're doing it in a way, and partly that's a large problem of them. On Trump, yeah, sure. I mean, I got to say though, like ever since the fucking Iraq War, the GWOT, Global War on Terror, I can't help but like puke in my mouth every time that gets.
I agree with you. I think
it's a garbage.
But I'm just saying that's where
issue.
we ended up. I don't think Obama would have become president if it wasn't for his opposition to the Iraq War. Let's not forget that one of Obama's signature campaign issues was the fact that he was right on the Iraq War. Again, like we wouldn't have expected that on the day after 9/11, that this guy who no one had heard of, who had a Muslim father, who would become president like 8 years later. That's a thing. We don't always anticipate how the Middle East figures in the American story ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
What do you mean you guess?
It doesn't. Look, I don't see the Middle East as
I just
the cause of one of the stupidest decisions in the history of the 20th century, which was the invasion of Iraq. Like,
okay,
really,
but that happened.
Right, it happened because we had a really dumb president who was motivated and manipulated through simple appeals to values, among other things.
So maybe in an ideal world,
so we had a stupid
we would
president.
have presidents who were very like sober-minded and wouldn't let the Middle East push them in any of these directions. But the problem is the prevalence of sentimental arguments. But if we take that as a given, so clearly even Biden and Obama weren't able to fully extract themselves from the Middle East.
We'll see what Biden manages to do. I mean, he's just started, and we'll see. Maybe he buckles and.
But what if
feels
my
like
argument is that there will never be a president who's able to follow through on Obama's dream because of the sentimental attachments, whether it's to the Holy Land for religious reasons or for human rights reasons or whatever it might be, because we care about civilian casualties in places like Gaza. If we take that as a given, that at least one of the two major parties in the US, and even the other one, cares about the Middle East for like the opposite reason, because they don't like Muslims and they want to like make Muslims suffer, I guess, or something. Maybe that's one of the like the animating features there. Clearly, and evangelicals clearly have an abiding interest in what happens in the Holy Land. So it doesn't, the case that we can sort of stop caring about the Middle East doesn't seem strong for either of the two major parties.